Well, I should mention this lecture is very timely for other reasons as well. Today marks the day that we have submitted our federal grant application for our Center for the Study of Europe. So we've been thinking about all things European, and at BYU, a major part of that, are all things United Kingdom. Today, we welcome, as I mentioned before, Professor Robert Tyler, who's currently a visiting professor of British history at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. Professor Tyler has been invited to speak as a visiting lecturer on multiple occasions for the University of Wales and the Center for Community and Lifelong Learning, both in Newport, Wales. His main areas of research interest are international migration, and more specifically on the nature of immigrant groups in the United States, South America, and Australia during the 19th century. He's published articles in several journals, most recently including the Welsh Language Press in Colonial Victoria in Victorian History Journal. A book based on his latest research in Australia, titled The Welsh in an Australian Gold Town, is set to be published later this year. Professor Tyler has received multiple honors and awards for teaching, most notably the Fulbright Robertson Visiting Professorship in British History. Previously, he acted as an executive officer for the National Assembly of Wales from 2004 to 2006. He has lived in Japan, Argentina, the United States, and Australia, and has forged contacts throughout the world. He studied history at the University College of Wales, where he was eventually awarded a teaching assistantship, enabling him to complete an MA in history at the University of Pittsburgh. Just after receiving his PhD from the University of Melbourne in Victoria, Australia in 1997, he was awarded an Australian government scholarship to research the Welsh in the 19th century. Tyler's interests are widespread and include history, politics, international affairs, and travel. We're in for a treat today. Please join me in welcoming Professor Robert Tyler.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for what can only be described as a sterling introduction. Secondly, I've only been in this area and visiting you for the last 5 days or so. I'd like to say a particular thanks, and in all sincerity, I've had a marvellous time here, great welcome, and I've stayed with Tom Taylor and his family, and really, every single individual I've had the pleasure to meet has been extremely pleasant, so thank you all for that. Thanks very much. Right, as was alluded to in the introduction, much of my career, well, it has had something of a peripatetic nature. It's seen me travel around the world quite a lot. I've spent 2 years, 3 years, chunks of time, and even as much as 4 years in other countries, then I've returned to my own fair land after spending this amount of time at home. Amongst numerous things, advantages it has given me, it's certainly given me an ability to see changes, the way the nature of society, perhaps that's a bit grandiose, the way things have changed in Britain. Some things have changed for the good, some things for the bad, if you will. But certainly, and what I wanted to talk about today, is there's been a definite change over the last 30 years, since I began travelling, in identity. The way the peoples, and I think it's fair to say the peoples of the British state, regard themselves, ideas of in mid-sentence, notice how the peoples of these countries, of the British state, regard how they identify themselves, their identity. In particular today, their national identity, their national allegiance. And I think I perceived during my chunks of time abroad that there's been a change in identity, in allegiance, that threatens, ultimately, and I don't think it's going too far in saying, threatens the unity of the British state itself. That might sound somewhat sensationalist, and I'll go back to a title of, I did a similar lecture quite recently, and the title of that lecture, some months ago actually, was the Disunited Kingdom, the Breakup of Britain. Now that might sound somewhat sensationalist, alarmist indeed, but I think that there are forces underway at present that are going to mean, without a shadow of a doubt, at the very least, a realignment in the relationship of the constituent countries of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Right, having said that, first of all, it's important to identify, not only for an American audience, but indeed for a British audience, what do we mean when we talk about the British state, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? Well, first of all, what I'd like to do is to dispel any idea that the British state, and indeed therefore a British identity, is of some ancient antiquity, that it goes back, its origins lie in the mists of time, hundreds or indeed thousands of years ago. Now this is a commonly held misconception, the belief that the British state is something ancient, of ancient lineage, if you will. Now it's held not just by people outside of the UK, and not just by the rank and file people like my good self in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but it's also held by people and put forward and promulgated by people who quite frankly should know better. Let me give you an example. In 1997, John Major, who was then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, he had this to say in 1997. You may remember, well, some of you probably won't remember it, but anyways, British Prime Minister, Conservative Prime Minister, he had this to say about the Labour Party's suggestion to give Scotland a parliament. And he stated that if you give Scotland a parliament, it would put an end to 1,000 years of British history. Similarly, quite well regarded, well, not by everybody, a newspaper columnist called Melanie Phillips, talking about the Lisbon Treaty, a European constitution, if you will, said 1,000 years of British history have been extinguished without a shot being fired. So, well, they're talking about 1,000 years of British history, and we're not talking about tabloid hacks in the gutter press or any area you would expect to put forward ideas that were wildly inaccurate. We're talking about the Prime Minister of the British state. Well, he was out. It hasn't been 1,000 years of British history, it's been decidedly less. He was out, but to the tune of, well, 700 years, in fact. Not just a minor thing. Having said that, we do have a British state, and let's take a look at what it looks like, again, and how it came into being. Obviously, this is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Scotland, England, Wales, and the 6 counties of the northeastern corner of the island of Ireland is also part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. This part is an independent nation state called the Republic of Ireland. Well, how did this come into being? Well, those of you who are doing Welsh and Welsh history along with that, well, naturally enough, for geographical reasons, or unfortunately enough, depending on your perspective, Wales was the first part of the island, the main island, to become part of any sort of unified state. It was initially militarily conquered in 1282. This is who's seen Braveheart, the movie here? Oh, excellent, excellent. Terms of reference, brilliant. Well, the bad guy in that, Edward Longshanks, is Edward I. He fails to conquer Scotland, primarily because he's conquering Wales, and it bankrupts England, basically. Wales is conquered in 1282, and when you guys who are going to Wales visit the northwest of the country, you'll see a ring of enormous castles, Caernarfon, Harlech, Balmaris, the biggest castles in Europe, medieval castles in Europe, which basically are to subjugate the local population. Wales is conquered essentially, militarily, 1282. It regains its independence in the eyes of the Scottish king, the French emperor, the Javanese pope, for about 10 years or so in the first decade of the 15th century, but it's under Owain Glyndwr. It's essentially militarily reconquered by 1415. Wales is in something of a limbo politically until 1536, when we have what's called an Act of Union. Well, is it an act of union between England and Wales, or is it an act of annexation? Well, here's a quick quotation from the so-called Act of Union. His Highness, and it's Henry VIII, by the way, hath ordained, enacted, and established that his said country or dominion of Wales shall stand and continue forever from henceforth incorporated, united, and annexed to and with this realm of England. It doesn't really sound like an act of union to me. It sounds like an act of annexation. Another major clue that it's not an act of union is there's not a single Welsh signatory involved in this. So there we are. Nonetheless, what we've got is political union in 1536. What remains, however, despite a lack of Welsh polity, there remains cultural difference. The entire, well, except for the great landowning classes and some colonists here, the vast majority, 80, 90, 95% of the population retains Welsh as its only or first language. This doesn't happen in Ireland or Scotland, but Wales retains its language and all the associated culture that goes with that. So that's the first act, if you will. The first stage of the Union is the Union of Wales in 1536. Second along, is Scotland. We've mentioned 1282. Edward I has wrecked himself financially, and we've all seen Braveheart. William Wise and then Robert the Bruce manages to retain militarily Scottish independence through military forces. Whatever, the inexorable roll towards the union of the island, there's a union of the crowns in 1603. That means the King of Scotland becomes the King of England and Scotland, or England and Wales and Scotland. James I in 1603. The first step on the road, I think you would say. And then there is the actual political act of union in 1707, which sees the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh vote itself out of existence. It is not a popular measure. It's not a popular decision amongst the general population. The carriages taking Scottish MPs to vote for union with England are stoned in the streets of Edinburgh, and there's Robbie Burns's poem, "We were bought and sold for English gold." Nevertheless, union takes place, and this is the first time we have the term Great Britain being used. We have the United Kingdom, obviously, in 1603, but Great Britain is used in 1707. What is significant here, as retaining national identity, in Wales we've got a single language, which is spoken throughout and by all, almost. In Scotland, there's not a single language. There is a Celtic language, Gaelic, or Scotch Gaelic, spoken in the western half of the Highlands. In the southern parts of the country, it's English. So it's not a single language. There's religious differences as well. But there is an idea, remember, Scotland has been an independent nation state for centuries. That remains, at least the memory of that. In addition, part of the deal of the Act of Union is Scotland retains its education system and its legal system. So as a civic national identity is retained in Scotland. Not so much a cultural, homogenous cultural identity as in Wales. Now, Ireland, I'd love to go into this, but for reasons of time and, well, indeed sanity, it's going to be impossible today to go into detail about how the process of uniting Ireland with Britain. The main dates we can think about is Ireland's conquered and its rebellion, conquest and rebellion. The major significance is the plantation of English and Scottish Protestants in the northeastern corner of Ireland at the first part of the 17th century. There's no particular date, but this part of Ireland is colonized. The native Irish Gaelic speakers are kicked out. Essentially, it's far more complex than that, obviously, but this becomes a British part of Ireland. In the first decade, or begins in the first decade of the 17th century, 1600 onwards. The Act of Union takes place, there are rebellions throughout the centuries. The Act of Union sees in 1801 the Irish Parliament, but remember the Irish Parliament is only Protestants are allowed to sit in it, so it's not really representative of the general population of Ireland. The Irish Parliament, even though it's a Protestant Parliament itself, disappears in 1801. It votes itself out of existence. Again, the reasons behind this are numerous. So Ireland is governed directly from London, and that is the first and indeed only time that we have the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. In 1801, that's when it comes into place. That's the only time. Of course, throughout the 19th century, there were rebellions to get out of this whole agreement, this union, to repeal the Act of Union. There's rebellions in 1848, 1867. Eventually, there's a rebellion in the middle of the First World War in 1916. The result of this is the Free State in 1922, where this part of Ireland, which is predominantly Catholic, becomes a self-governing nation state. It's not a republic as of yet, and this part of Ireland remains part of Britain. And the Republic of Ireland becomes the southern part of Ireland, the Irish Free State, becomes a republic in 1949. So that's how we get the Union together. So basically, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland only exists from 1801 for 1922, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, sorry, for that small amount of time. Indeed, as it stands at present, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland has only been in existence since 1922. So it's the British state, as we think of it today, is 88 years old. Okay, let's take a quick look at the flags, etc. Just to give you a quick indication, the Union of Scotland and England gives us this flag, the Union flag, then Ireland gives us this flag. And there's a quick rundown on the dates there. Coming back to my title, well, subtitle that I used in the past, not so much today. I'd like to focus mostly on Wales, but Wales cannot be seen in isolation in this process. The breakup of Britain. Now, I said it sounds a bit on the alarmist side, and it certainly does that. But I think it is almost justified to use terms as alarming, as sensationalist almost, as the breakup of Britain, the disunited kingdom. The thinking behind, my thinking behind this is that there are developments that have taken place that are not known outside of the United Kingdom and were rarely touched on by the British media, the British media in the UK itself. Since 1999, Scotland has had a national parliament of its own, which has been responsible for all domestic policies. That's health, transportation, education, things of this nature. Scotland has had that since 1999. In Wales, well, let's take a look at Scotland first, I think. So Scotland has had a parliament since 1999. Now, in that Scottish parliament, at present, not initially, since 2007, in fact, it is led by the Scottish National Party, the SNP, we'll call them. So this Scottish parliament, which is responsible for domestic policies, which is pretty 90% of the day-to-day lives of people, is led by the SNP. It doesn't have a majority, but it's the largest single parliament. The SNP, the purpose of the SNP is complete Scottish independence. Right. Now, why this has come to the fore, why I think it's important and it's pressing today, is that the SNP in government has promised the Scottish electorate by November of this year that it will hold a vote on complete independence for Scotland. Now, thinking about that, they've promised it, it's a manifesto pledge. If that vote takes place, if it goes through as a yes, that is the end of Britain. That is the end of the British state. Now, this hasn't gone home to a lot of people in Britain as of yet. I think it's about to become rudely to the fore after the general election in May. We'll be hearing a lot more about this. That is the deal in Scotland. The SNP is in government, and governing rather well, I think it's fair to say. And they're pledged to hold a referendum on complete independence and the end of Britain. And that's that. In Wales, the situation even is not quite the same. Wales has a National Assembly since 1999, not a parliament. It similarly has control over domestic issues, transportation, education, health, etc. It doesn't have the strength or power of the Scottish Parliament. It can't make laws without going to Westminster first. It's a long and complex process which I won't bore you with. What's of significance to us is that the National Assembly is led by two parties, the Labour Party, the British party, but also by Plaid Cymru, which is the party of Wales, which is the Scottish National Party's equivalent in Wales. It's a national party, not a nationalist, but a national party. It wants and advocates Welsh independence. So what we've got is a situation which almost mirrors Scotland, that this government, the Labour Party and Plaid Cymru, have promised to hold a referendum in Wales before May of next year on powers for the National Assembly, which will be similar to the Scottish powers. Not quite the same, but similar to Scottish powers. As I mentioned, I'd love to go into Ireland, and fortunately we haven't got time. I'll maybe allude to it, but I'll allude to it only to say that in Northern Ireland, what is a major development is that for the first time ever in the Northern Ireland Assembly, which has been reconvened since 2007, for the first time ever you've got extreme unionists, those who want to remain part of Britain, the Democratic Unionist Party, in government with hardline Republicans, Sinn Féin. They're in the same government, which is, for me, fantastic in the original meaning of the word fantastic. I'm not saying that's great. So my point is that in 2010, we've got in these three devolved bodies, the political parties that are either in government, they're in charge, or they're in coalition, they're part of government, advocating, questioning the integrity of the British state. They want to break up the British state. I see this myself as what could be called, well, it's a constitutional earthquake. What I'm saying here, it's not inconceivable that by the end of this year, the British state will be finished, which I think is amazing. Now, how on earth has this come about? As I said, I've seen the change in things over the decades and so on. What I think, to try and get a grip on how this incredible change has come about, is to rewind 30 years, when I was 16. I was in high school in Wales in 1979, 1979, and the deal in Wales and Scotland was during the 1960s and 1970s, these two national parties in Scotland and Wales, the SNP and Plaid Cymru, had some electoral success. And what it had done, it had led the Labour government of the 1970s to say, right, you can have your own parliaments, assemblies, that will give you power over domestic issues. Exactly the situation we have today. And in 1979, on March the 1st, 1979, St. David's Day, by the way, they held a referendum, or they held referenda in Scotland and Wales. Do you want devolution, as we call it? Do you want a parliament for Scotland, parliament for Wales? Not independence, but a government, a body that will oversee domestic policy. And this was the vote in 1979 in Wales for that. Okay. As you can see, it was pretty much of a massive rejection by the Welsh electorate in 1979. It was 4-1 against. It was a massive no vote. It was a crushing defeat, and I remember it, I was 16, I was sort of baffled by all of this. My father, for example, voted no. He was a Welsh patriot, but he was also very much British, and this is what we'll come on to later shortly, about that. In Scotland, same date, same type of vote, the Scottish Assembly was going to be a bit stronger, this was the vote. So it went actually in favour in Scotland, but the deal was you had to have 40% of the electorate in favour, and they only had 30. It wasn't enough of a victory to get the legislation through Parliament. So what we had in 1979 was, rejection, outright rejection in Wales, and pretty much lukewarm response in Scotland. So it was a real turn down, a real rejection of any idea of some sort of political autonomy for Wales, certainly, and even for Scotland. The immediate result of this in 1979 was the Labour government fell, Margaret Thatcher was elected, and it brought in 18 years of Conservative rule. In addition to that, there was a drift to the right, I think, in British politics. There was anti-trade union law introduced. There was a miners' strike, which smashed the mining communities in South Wales and Scotland, which were strong mining areas. In addition to that, there was a reaffirmation of British identity, an assertion of identity. In 1979, opinion poll found out only 58% of people in Wales claimed to have a primarily Welsh identity, and in Scotland it was down to 56%. There were further things. There was the Falklands War, which also saw a lot of Union flag waving, Britain against Argentina. There was generally the votes of the Scottish National Party went down to 11% in the 1980s during the elections. Plaid Cymru went down to less than 8%. It looked like basically the whole national question was off the agenda. And yet, in 1997, with the end of the Conservative government and then Labour government came in 1997, the whole question was asked again. Do you want a Parliament for Scotland? Do you want a National Assembly for Wales? And this time the result was, well, let's have a look. Massively different, I think we'd have to say. The Scottish result in 1997 showed a huge swing, 25% swing towards the yes vote, 3-1 in favour of a Scottish Parliament, 18 years after the narrow vote before. In Wales, well, it was a knife edge, and it came down to 0.6% of the electorate voted yes, they want the National Assembly in 1997. The numbers were 6,721 was the majority. And you see people in Wales walking around with t-shirts wearing 6,721. I was in Australia at this time, and I remember I was obviously going to go home and live in Wales. I really wanted to know what was happening. I phoned home from Australia 32 times that day, and it seriously took me 3 months. I was on a scholarship. It took me 3 months to pay back the phone bill. But the point is, it was really right to the wire, but it went through. Why is it so close in Wales? Well, Wales has a different history from Scotland. First of all, you have to remember a quarter of the population of Wales is not from Wales. The vast majority are from England, which some obviously voted yes, but they were very much less warm towards the idea of a Welsh national identity manifested in a political expression. In addition, we have a living language in Wales, which was used by the no side to divide the yes side. If you vote yes for this, it will give all the good jobs to Welsh speakers. Scotland doesn't have a language problem, or this side to it, I suppose. So Wales, for a variety of reasons, was closer, much closer. Why? What on earth had happened that changed this from 1979, especially in Wales, when it was fought and won against, to this narrow victory 18 years later? Well, first of all, I think we have to look at Britain as a whole, and for the election of 1979, general election of 83, general election of 87, general election of 92, the Conservative government won again and again and again and again and again, okay? But it had minimal support in Wales, and also in Scotland. By 1997, there wasn't a single Conservative MP in Wales, and there wasn't a single Conservative MP in Scotland. And yet for 18 years we've had Conservative governments adopting policies which weren't voted for by the British electorate. In addition to that, and it's not trivializing things, the outlook of Conservative leaders, English Conservative leaders, Margaret Thatcher, for example, discussing the whole national question, said in 1992, "I will remind you that I am an English nationalist." Well, congratulations, Margaret. Again, this is not going to go down too well in the Celtic countries. In addition, also I think, in 1992, John Major, or John again, no offense to him, he's a man of integrity apparently, if the authority of the integrity said, or for that, for reasons of good taste, decency, etc. He had this to say in 1992. John Major, the British Prime Minister, had this to say. The Prime Minister of Britain, 1992, he wins this general election against all the odds. He's describing his view of Britain, and he said, 50 years from now, Britain will still be the country of long shadows on cricket grounds, warm beer, invincible green suburbs, dog lovers and pools fillers, and, as George Orwell said, old maids bicycling to Holy Communion through the morning mist. Well, these are delightful images, These are delightful images, but they're quintessentially English images. There's not a lot of this going on in Newport, where I'm from, let me tell you. Okay, of much greater significance, there's the British government has a cabinet position, a government position for a representative for Scotland and one for Wales. It's called the Secretary of State. And obviously, having few or no MPs in Wales and Scotland, they were appointing Secretary of States who were Conservative MPs, obviously, and few Conservatives in Wales, so they're having to appoint English Conservative MPs to represent Wales in the British government. And they came again and again, 4 in a row actually. There was one African journalist who visited Wales in '97, stated, "The colonial mentality is more firmly entrenched in your country than in any other I have been to." It was described, therefore, as a democratic deficit. Conservative support in Wales was down to 25 to 26%, and yet we were getting Conservative MPs. The point of all of this is, it was giving people, why are we voting for Labour Party policies and getting Conservative policies? If we're a region of England, fair enough. But if we're a nation, then surely this is not really right. In addition to that, there are other factors. Ireland at this time, the Republic of Ireland, independent nation state, is doing quite well, thank you, with the assistance of the EU. In addition to that, there's a breakup of the Soviet Union, and we have re-emergent nations, especially the Baltic states, like Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, who are all smaller, 2 out of 3 of them are smaller than Wales itself, and significantly smaller than Scotland, and then nation states with a seat in the European Union, seat on the United Nations. Why not Wales? Why not Scotland? So there are many, many things that changed identity. The result of this, I think, there has been a change in how people see themselves. This is some stats from the Economic and Social Research Council. I think it clearly shows a movement away, for these variety of reasons, away from a British identity towards a Welsh identity. We'll skip that one and go straight to this one. And more significantly, I think, it is related to age group. Now, remembering that there's 25% of the population of Wales are not Welsh anyway, unless they want to be. Thinking of identity is over 65s, 36% accept a Welsh identity, 36% both, 28% British. But the younger people is 64% Welsh, 80% both. It's a definite movement amongst younger people towards a Welsh identity rather than a British identity. In Scotland, this is also by the Economic and Social Research Council, it's clearer. This is a forced question, however. You don't get to say both, so it's clearer. Scottish or British. Now you can see it's a clear move from 56 Scottish in 79, 38% British, then to the most recent one I could find is it's moved massively towards a Scottish and not a British identity. All right, all well and good. We've got a national identity, and I think it's clear, and I can see it at home, having been away and come back, clearly amongst young people, they're Welsh, not British, without a doubt. My generation were both. My parents' generation were probably more British than Welsh. How does this manifest, how does this impact upon how you want to be governed? Coming back to the whole thing, is Britain going to break up? Well, constitutional preference in Wales is not that terrifically dramatic as regards independence. Those wanting independence is not a tremendous amount of change over the last 10, 13 years. It's still between 10 and 15%. However, what is significant, I think, those who want the status quo, that is an assembly for domestic issues, is, except for this blip, stayed around 25 to 30%. What is significant is those that want to get rid of the National Assembly, go back to direct rule from London, has gone from 40% down to 17. In addition, those who want a proper parliament, like Scotland, has more than doubled and gone up to 43. The most recent poll, which came out last week, has shown this one getting 56% of support, and this has gone down to 13%. I didn't have time to put it on, but there we are. So there's definitely a trend towards a national parliament, if not outright independence. Now Scotland, a different kettle of old fish altogether. Right, it's a difficult one. This is the status quo, a parliament as it is, as it stands at present. There's, all we can see from this is a general move towards independence. What I think is significant, and I haven't put it up here, is that there's a rider question for this. If the Conservatives win the next general election, which takes place in a couple of weeks, the majority of Scottish people want independence. And that's significant. It'll go back to if a Conservative government wins, what would you vote in such a referendum? And then this goes over 50. What I think will happen is that when the leader of the SNP, Alex Salmond, will probably call some sort of vote if the Parliament allows him. He's not stupid. He's not going to say independence or bust. He's going to have a gradation, what's called a preferendum. Do you want independence? Do you want to stay as it is? Or do you want a Parliament with a hell of a lot more powers? And that, I think, is the way he'll go, and that is what I think Scotland will vote for, which will leave them independent in all but name, really. And it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to outright independence after that. I'd like to look at Ireland, but I'm afraid we don't really have time, but I'll discuss it with anyone individually, Northern Ireland, and it is fascinating what's going on there. Just a quick flavour, but not in any depth. What I'm intrigued by is that the hard line stance appears to be dissipating. Those that consider themselves unionist, i.e. British, those who are nationalist want to be part of the Republic of Ireland. Those who are neither, look how this is altered. All ages, but look at the age group difference. 65, half of them are unionists, hardliners. Quarter of them are nationalist hardliners, 26%. Well, come on, get a grip. The young people, however, it's 24. Actually, there's more nationalists than unionists, but it's nearly half of them have no real affirmation. They're not really saying, oh, they've had enough, basically. And I think that's the most encouraging sign of the lot, is that the hardline sectarian standpoints appear to be moving on. Maybe that's the best way forward. One thing that's really and unfortunately overlooked in a lot of this is the attitude of English people to this. And far be it from me, as a Welshman, to suggest what's going on in the English mind, and most people have been trying to work that out for 7 centuries and we've gone nowhere. But the point being, the English point of view, remember England constitutes 83% of the population, and really they're going to have some say in the matter, I would imagine. It's been overlooked. There's very little research being done into this. What I think is fair to say from my English friends, and there are some, is that there's a certain amount of bewilderment, if not resentment, to the fact that there are lots of positives that's come out of devolution to Scotland and Wales. University fees are negligible, are less in Scotland for Scottish and Welsh students in Scottish and Welsh universities. A lot less. You can qualify for grants in Scottish and Welsh universities if you're Scottish and Welsh. There are free school meals for school children, elementary school children, the free parking in hospitals, things of a day-to-day nature are benefits. They'd be working, but the English will say, well, who's paying for this? It's the British government. So there is certainly something to do with that. In addition, every single Labour government, British Labour government, that's been elected has been reliant largely on Scottish and Welsh Labour MPs. So there is a democratic deficit there as well. I won't go into too much detail, but it is interesting. What has come out of this is that until relatively recently, it's an English identity, British identity, has been almost synonymous. I read history books, and they use England, Britain, especially American historians, crush it, willy-nilly, if you will. There's no differentiation, and that's the same amongst English people. English, British are interchangeable. What I've noticed, really, is that it's changing amongst the general population, especially amongst young English people, that they're now asserting an English identity as opposed to a British identity. I think that's useful, or interesting to say the least. It's reflected here, 1992, English-British is changed with a larger number considering themselves English rather than British. If this was done on an age breakdown, then certainly it's very, very clear that young people are much more likely to say they're English than British. An interesting development. Not a tremendous amount of research done on this, and you have to use other barometers to get a grip of this. One is sport. Sport might, I'm not trivializing anything at all, but it is important. If you were to go and watch a football match, a soccer match, excuse me, when England are playing at international level, 20, 30 years ago, you would see a sea of Union Jacks, the Union flag, the red, white, and blue. If you go nowadays, this is what you see. You'll only see the cross of St. George, and that is the deal. When, this pains me to say this, but England won the Rugby World Cup in 2003. That really is a hard thing for me to say, but when the celebrations in Trafalgar Square, there wasn't a Union Jack in sight. This was the deal. 20, 30 years ago, this would have been the Union flag. It is now only the flag of St. George. I don't know if any of you know or have heard of Billy Bragg. He's an author, musician, songwriter. He's had nothing to do whatsoever with the hard right. He's very left-wing, for that matter. He had this to say after observing this scene. Watching the crowd in Trafalgar Square, I couldn't help but be amazed at how quickly the flag of St. George has replaced the Union Jack in the affections of England fans. A generation ago, England games looked a lot like the last night of the proms, with the red, white, and blue firmly to the fore. Now it seems the English have begun to remember who they are. I think that's a telling point. The only research that's done on it is that bit by Oxford University. There's a political program called Newsnight, which asked the question, and it came out, the result was 61% of the English people, the population, were in favour now of an English Parliament to deal with domestic issues. only 32% against. It strikes me that it may well be that the impetus towards the dissolution of the United Kingdom could come from the English themselves, which would be somewhat ironic when we consider that by fire and sword, the impetus towards the union of the four nations came from the English in the first place. Right, well, coming to this, towards a conclusion, I'm predicting some sort of change. I think within 5 and certainly 10 years, well, within a very short space of time, there's going to be a realignment in the relationship between the constituent countries of the United Kingdom. Without a shadow of a doubt, that's going to take place, and we'll see it in newspapers in the United States following the election in a couple of months. This will come to the fore, without a doubt, especially Scotland. My prediction personally is that within 10 years, I'd be surprised if Scotland is not independent. Within 20 years, I'd be absolutely staggered if Scotland wasn't independent. That's a personal prediction, so don't bet on it or anything, but that's my feeling. I think Wales will get further self-government, and there will definitely be a realignment within the relationship between Wales and England. Northern Ireland, well, that's going to take a hell of a lot longer to break down the sectarian divide and maybe ultimately see a united Ireland. We've been here before, however, and I kind of like this one. This was from 1886. There was a strong, under Gladstone, the strong Home Rule movement to get over the prickly subject of Ireland. Gladstone and Asquith said, right, what we'll do, we'll have Home Rule all round for Scotland, Wales, England and Ireland. We'll all be self-governing as part of a super united kingdom. So this is a postcard. Well, they won the day, the anti-Home Rulers won the day against Home Rule. No Home Rule, united we stand, divided we fall. And we got Ireland and Pat with his shamrock, John Bull for England with his rose, Sandy, I don't know, with his kilt and his thistle. And I always seem to get the rough end of the stick coming from Wales. We get to wear the pointy hat for Wales, Taffy and carry leeks. Anyway, the point is that with the propaganda of this sophistication defeated Home Rule over 100 years ago, so I think it should well be defeated again. There we are. Personally, I think there's going to be radical change, but I hope ultimately it's done without animosity. What I'd like to conclude with, and this is not, I'm not advocating the breakup of the UK whatsoever, not at all. But I'd like to conclude with a Plaid Cymru gentleman called Gwynfor Evans, who won a seat in 1966, and probably started the whole ball rolling for this, the latest bout of Home Rule. He had this to say, died in 2005, a very religious man, and a man of tremendous integrity, a pacifist and so on. Anyway, he had this to say, and I don't necessarily agree with his view of a breakup, a confederation, but I certainly agree with his sentiments of goodwill. He had this to say in one of his books, one of his many books, on the survival of the Czech nation under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He stated of Wales, we too can say we were here before Great Britain, and we shall be here after her too. For the day is coming when Wales and Scotland, Ireland and England will arise out of the ashes of Great Britain to associate in harmony with each other in a partnership of free and equal nations. Well, I don't think you can say fairer than that. Thank you. Right, now I don't know how this works, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to field them.
And can you just wait for the microphone and say your name and what you're studying so the podcast can pick that up?
Thank you, that was really interesting. I'm Brittany Lester, I'm studying broadcast journalism. I can talk loud.
I can hear.
I'm just wondering how you see this affecting the United States.
Right, I've been asked that question many an occasion. I was talking to a friend of mine at Angelo State University in Texas. He's in Texas, and strangely enough, he's rather on the right of the political spectrum. I'm not making any observations there, but he is. He was concerned about how would this impact on the United States' international role. Would the US be getting support as Britain has given support and Tony Blair for the United States military interventions or foreign policy overseas? That's a hell of a question. One I have to say, in all honesty, I don't know. I would say to you, without a shadow of a doubt, that those who are advocating Welsh independence are very radically opposed to what happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on, without a doubt. But they want independence. If that came about, then it's going to be a different situation altogether. Now, Scotland, on the other hand, which I think are very close to independence, and nowhere, the leaders of the Scottish National Party are nowhere near as opposed to American foreign policy as those in the Welsh National Party. And I don't think it's for any, I think there are many moral issues involved, but I think primarily it's pure practicality. They may well be independent shortly, and they're going to want all their international friends that they possibly can get. And the United States is going to be a massive international friend. And even after all that, what's the population of the United Kingdom? 83% of the population is English. The powerhouse, the power will still remain in England, and I think that that would mean England's support, because it's going to be a more right-wing orientated policy-wise country. It's more likely to have a conservative government without Scottish MPs, massively more likely. So I think you're going to get more support from an England as an independent state, probably more questioning support in foreign policy terms from independent Scotland, and certainly as it stands at present, an independent Wales. Does that go somewhere to answer it? It's also hypothetical at this stage, and I think the bottom line is, once you're independent on the world stage, you're not going to be shouting at the USA. It's not going to happen. It'd be a bad move, I say, especially if you're in your first year of government, but you're not going to make enemies in the United States. It's not going to happen. So,
what are your projections for the survival of the Welsh language, given the mass immigration of English in Wales?
Right, I'll be honest with you on this one. There are so many, the survival of the Welsh language, given the demographic change, the movement of English people into Welsh-speaking areas, bleak. I don't think they're good. We see such rosy being painted of, excuse me, let's just come on. We see such rosy pictures being painted of the numbers speaking Welsh increasing and the percentage of those speaking Welsh increasing. In the last census, 2001, the percentage and the number increased. I think this will go off. I think so. The numbers and the percentage increased in the 2001 census. We have them in 2001, not 2000. What's happening, the most important thing for me, is that the language exists on the street, is spoken as a day-to-day language, in the pub, in the bank, in the shop, in the home, by the idiots on the street, by all walks of society. Now that still exists in Wales. In Ireland, that doesn't exist for the Irish language, tragically. There are a few pockets right on the far western seaboard of Ireland, the rural economy, limited registers, but in Wales you can go to a medium-sized town like Carnarvon, hopefully you guys will go, whoever's going, and you'll hear more Welsh, much more Welsh than English, by the guys with the skinheads and the boots, or by the businessmen, by all walks of society. But English movement into those areas, or non-Welsh speakers, and let's face it, 99% of them are English, is disrupting that. It's a simple fact of the matter. It's an economic thing behind it, because they can afford houses over the heads of local people. The only way you're going to stop that is to introduce a housing policy which gives rights to housing to local people first. Now, the Welsh Assembly wanted to bring that in, and they had the power to do that. And they were called, those that advocated that were called the racist, xenophobic, anti-English, and they gave it. They bowed down to that. If they've got the political will to do that, to give housing priority to local people, then there's a possibility that the northwestern corner of the country could still just pull it off to keep Welsh as a living language. In response also to that, but they got the political will to put up with the jibes of racism and xenophobia and all sorts. I don't know if they have or not. Having said that, Cornwall, the Lake District, Devon, have introduced these policies. The Lake District in the northwest of England have introduced housing priority for locals. But of course, you can't call an English person in the Lake District anti-English, can you? So it's complete hypocrisy. If they've got the political will, the Welsh language could still be saved. It'll never die. It's never going to die. But as a living community language, it could still be saved, but it requires hard choices and hard political will. And I'm not sure the political leaders of the National Assembly have got that political will. They've been in power for 13 years now, and they haven't done a single thing to address that issue. They come out with all documentation of bilingual Wales. Every single thing you want is bilingual in Welsh and English. But if you can't buy a house in the village you live in, and you can't get a job in the village you live in, what the hell's the point if your redundancy notice is in Welsh and English? Yes, sir.
You talked about the benefits of the Scottish and Welsh devolution because of the money that comes from London in the form of, free parking and things like that you talked about. How willing are the Welsh and the Scottish to give that up? If they go to complete independence, they won't have that economic base that comes from London.
It's a good question. What I said actually was the perception of many in England that these positive, these helpful policies are funded by the British state. Whether that's true or not is another matter altogether. Most of those advocating independence for Scotland, independence for Wales, would say, no, we are giving more to the British state than we're getting out. This is a very difficult economic question. Whether Wales and Scotland are viable economically is something that I'm not in a position to answer. I'm not an economist. I've told several people that since I've been here. I don't know. What I can say is this, the nationalist side of things would say, well, Wales and Scotland are economically viable, and if we were self-governing, we'd be better off financially. Whether that's true or not is a question I can't answer. It seems that those advocating independence say Wales and Scotland are viable. Those that want to keep Britain together say Wales and Scotland aren't viable. My feeling is that they are viable. Whether you're going to have to take a hit on certain services, I don't know. But the basic construct, the building blocks of any economy surely is energy. Wales and Scotland are self-sufficient in energy and export energy in whatever form to England. England's not self-sufficient in energy, or in water for that matter. Now, your more hardline Welsh nationalists, amongst which I am not numbered, let me assure you of that, would say, well, if there's going to be arguments over this, over the distribution of funds, then how are you going to run anything when you're not self-sufficient in energy? And England's not self-sufficient in energy, it imports massive electricity and water from Wales. Right, so I don't think you're going to be hard-pressed to persuade any group to take a cut in essential services for the right to be independent. But the nationalists in Scotland and Wales would argue that we're quite able to look after ourselves economically anyway. Yeah, it's a good point. We'll find out shortly in the case of Scotland, I think. And what they'd also argue is all the tiny countries in Europe, like Luxembourg, the Scandinavian countries, of course Norway's got loaded with natural resources, are far more better off than people in the British state. So little countries seem to be succeeding better than the larger ones. I'm not an economist, so I have to hold my hands up on much of that one. Yes, sir.
Has there been much thought, or perhaps what is the thought, of Welsh nationalists with relation to the European Union? How would they view perhaps becoming a part of that, or would they be rather opposed?
They're massively, massively in favour of the European Union, and it's not just because of the economic advantages that would accrue from being a member of the European Union, as has done to Ireland. It's also part of Plaid Cymru's philosophy since its inception, since its formation, has been, we're not British, we're Welsh Europeans, and some of the great intellectual thinkers in Wales, Raymond Williams, has always asserted, I'm a Welsh European, Britain doesn't come into it. Saunders Lewis, the founder of the party, and was president for some years, was also very much, became a Catholic for that very, well, maybe for other reasons as well, but no, they're very much pro-European and opposed to the British nationalists that they don't want anything to do with England. So you see a clash of this Union flag waving, we don't like the Europeans, and there is a xenophobia in British society, English society more accurately, against the French, for example. For historical reasons, England's been fighting France for centuries. But you have to remember that in most of those wars, the Welsh and the Scottish have been on the French side, and the Irish for that matter. So that doesn't apply in Wales, interestingly enough. So yeah, the nationalists, the national parties in Wales and Scotland very much want to be part of Europe, and the first thing they do on independence would be apply for membership of the European Union, without a shadow of a doubt. Definitely. Yes, sir.
Do you think it's likely that the EU would let them in?
Good question. Now, I knew personally a member of the European Parliament, what was her name? or something, Aline Morgan, she was, I think she resigned, she just resigned, as a Labour Party member. She said there's no way that this would happen because the European Union wouldn't want them in because it would mean their member states like France and Spain would then have to put up with independence movements in their own countries, Catalonia, the Basques, perhaps the Bretons. So she's saying, this is such, in my opinion, disingenuous rubbish, saying that the European Union wouldn't let them in anyway. Well, they just let in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. I mean, of course they let them in. But also the response to that by the nationalist side is that England would have to reapply as well. When Scotland, I'm saying not if, when Scotland secedes, because I'm pretty sure it will, Scotland will have to apply for membership of the European Union, but so will what remains. Well, it won't be England, it'll be England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. What they call it, and discuss it, what they're going to call this new state, I don't know, this is Fred or something, I don't know. That thing is going to have to apply for European membership as well. Are you saying the European Union is going to decline membership to England? It's not going to happen. I can't see them saying no. Whatever the British nationalists like Aline Morgan said to me face to face, that the EU would never let these little countries in because it would question the political integrity of their member states. Well, I personally think that's nonsense. The EU would let these smaller countries in, as they have been doing. I think they're going to let Turkey in. I don't think they're going to turn down Scotland and let an Islamic country, which is a second world country, into the EU, and not Scotland or something. Sure. But a very good question. Okay, I think this is, right, if there's no other questions, I guess we'll call it a day there. If anyone wants to discuss, especially the island stuff, please feel free to stay behind afterwards, but I guess that's it. Because,